Dragon is guaranteed to be one of the strongest characters in One Piece. Hey, I don't make the rules. But you know who does? Shonen tropes. In Battle Shonen, the father of the main character almost always turns out to be ridiculously strong. Think Yujiro and Baki, Minato and Naruto, Jin and Gon, Raizen and Yusuke. Even in Attack on Titan and Bleach, we eventually see Grisha and Ishin's real strength after they were initially presented as low-key. So yeah, it's basically set in stone that Dragon will be powerful. Maybe even stronger than his son Luffy, who, while close to his peak, still has room to grow, and his father Garp, who was a major figure in history but is clearly past his prime. Dragon, on the other hand, is in that sweet spot where top tier fighters have complete mastery over their abilities. And if that's not enough to get you hyped, there's another classic storytelling rule in Shonen. The later a character's abilities are revealed, the stronger they tend to be when we finally see them, all for the sake of pacing and keeping the power scaling under control. So the fact that Dragon was introduced so early in the story, in the monumental chapter 100, and yet his powers still haven't been revealed to this day, that tells you Oda has been holding something big in reserve for him. This isn't just a character thrown in on a whim, it feels like a concrete plan that keeps getting pushed back as the series grows longer and larger because Oda keeps finding more story to tell. If you think about it, there was even a point when Oda planned for One Piece to end in 5 years. That means Dragon was already in the blueprint for the short version of the story, introduced, hyped up, and then sidelined, which implies Oda has always had a specific, high-impact role in mind just for him. Because chapter 100 wasn't just any chapter either. It was literally titled, "The Legend Has Begun." Dragon's debut in Logetown, the same place where Roger's story began, wasn't subtle. That arc gave us the first clear moment where Luffy's will of D felt undeniable, smiling as he faced death on the execution platform, just like Roger 22 years earlier. Even Smoker caught the parallel. And then there's the storm. Dragon arrives in Logetown right after Luffy is saved by a bolt of lightning that destroys the platform. No warning, no storm clouds earlier, just instant divine intervention. It's almost like that scene was a statement. Luffy and Roger might share parallels, but they won't share the same fate. Sanji even comments on it, asking Zoro if he believes in a higher power. And so fans quickly latched onto the idea that Dragon caused that storm using a weather-related devil fruit ability, especially when you remember that during both his appearances, Logetown and the Goa Kingdom, when he saved Sabo, sudden blasts of wind hit exactly where Dragon stood, helping him achieve his goals. And while it's never been confirmed that Dragon caused them, it's one of the juiciest breadcrumbs that Oda has left, and it's become one of the most popular Dragon headcanons out there. And then consider the fact that the Gorosei, some of the oldest, most powerful living beings in the series, and even Imu as potentially the final antagonist of the story. The fact that Oda has already shown us their powers, or at least some of their powers, before Dragon, that tells you something. Oda is saving Dragon for a huge moment. After all, Dragon is their direct opposing force, and that first display of his abilities could be one of the most impactful reveals in the entire story. But before we dive deeper, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. The JoyFleet is almost at 100,000 subscribers, and we're always looking for fellow One Piece fans to discuss our favorite series with. Now, I know there are anime tropes where a character's reputation turns out to be false, the fraud or the false ultimate hero archetype. Mr. Satan from Dragon Ball, King from One Punch Man, and even Buggy in One Piece are all examples of where fame outweighs reality. And some fans have even tossed around the idea that Dragon could be the same. The man just keeps looking east. But I don't buy that for a second. Think about that Loketown scene again. Dragon gets close enough to grab Smoker's jite, and sure, he could have stopped him from a distance, but this feels like a deliberate Oda move, doing things in a way that looks cool while keeping his abilities hidden. By avoiding any obvious display of powers, Dragon stays in that untouchable mystery tier, which will make his eventual reveal hit even harder. And while we still don't know his exact abilities, the series has given us enough information to make us believe he is as dangerous as his reputation suggests. The world government literally brands him as the world's worst criminal. In a world that's seen Roger, Rox, Whitebeard, and Kaido, men who all had knowledge of how to reach the One Piece, and yet Dragon's the one put above them in terms of threat level. And sure, a lot of that comes from his political power as the supreme commander of the Revolutionary Army, the direct enemy of the world government, but the fear clearly runs deeper. As a former Marine, Dragon likely knows the institution's darker secrets, possibly being the very reason why he turned against them. Add that to his bloodline as Garp's son, and you start to see why Sakazuki in particular has had such a personal hatred towards him. During Marineford, Sakazuki repeatedly called Luffy Dragon's son, almost like killing Luffy would be the next best thing to killing Dragon himself. The fact that Akainu took priority in trying to eliminate Luffy over focusing on Whitebeard says a lot about where Dragon ranks in his mind. And that's what makes Dragon frightening. Not just his ideals, but the fact that Marines actively hunt him. Yet he's able to move freely and operate in secrecy. The title of Supreme Commander is no small thing either, especially when you consider who serves under him. Sabo, Kuma, Ivankov, all very heavy hitters in their own right, follow or followed Dragon not just because they share in his beliefs, but because they believe in his strength. Even Ivankov once remarked that Luffy's inhumane will made perfect sense for the son of Dragon. That line hints at a tenacity and a resolve that, when finally shown in combat, could put Dragon amongst the absolute monsters of the One Piece world. I think it's also been hinted that Dragon has Conqueror's Haki. In fact, scratch that, he definitely has Conqueror's Haki. And that's not just speculation, because back in chapter 570, when Luffy first awakened it at Marineford, Ivankov flat out said that there's no mistaking it. Luffy has Dragon's blood. That line came immediately after Luffy unleashed Conqueror's Haki, thereby heavily implying that Dragon is also a user. And not just a user, but perhaps a far more experienced one than Luffy, considering his status. Even Vice Admiral Doberman, who is roughly around Dragon's age, he made the connection instantly, saying that it made sense Luffy had Conqueror's Haki because he's Dragon's son. That comment also hinting that Doberman might have known Dragon personally during Dragon's time in the Marines. And that's the thing, right? Because if Dragon has the rarest form of Haki, Conqueror's, then there's no question that he's also mastered the other two. Observation and armament are practically prerequisites at his level. So Dragon isn't just a man with a cause, he's a man with the power to realize his plans. But then more than just physical power, Dragon's real strength lies in what he represents: freedom. Arguably the most important concept in the story that is One Piece. Dragon is actioning a change for the world in a way that one could argue is even more significant than anyone else. Freedom is obviously at the core of One Piece and is an ideal that many characters aspire for, including and most importantly our main character Luffy. Luffy also has a whole cast of supporting characters who have helped him bring freedom to the various islands he's visited along the way. But what I find so impressive, so very admirable about Dragon is his approach to achieving that freedom. Dragon has dedicated his entire life to ensuring freedom for the entire world at the expense of his own happiness. He has prioritized this worldly goal above his own needs and his own desires. And I don't know if you could say the same about Luffy. Yes, Luffy has also dedicated his entire life to becoming the Pirate King, which we know he only wants to become so that he can achieve some other goal. Some goal that is probably along the lines of freedom, but Luffy says this himself. Luffy chases adventure. The thrill of the journey journey, and fate just happens to be on his side, so it just so happens that every action Luffy takes is exactly what needs to help him to get closer to his goal. But Dragon is a whole nother story. He has made calculated decisions, sacrificing himself and his own happiness for the sake of the greater good. This is why he has maintained his distance from Luffy despite it being obvious that he loves his son very much. Dragon also hasn't allowed lofty concepts like fate get in his way. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there is an element of destiny in Dragon's story, but he is very different to the likes of Roger or even Shanks, who has bowed down to the face of fate. When Roger found out that he was too early to change the world, he accepted it. Even Shanks seems to be taking steps to play his role in the grand scheme of fate for Luffy to be the promised one. And I do think that that is also noble in its own way. There is honor in being able to recognize and admit that you are not the main character, and that you can only play a supporting role. But the feeling I get about Dragon is that he's so focused on bringing freedom to the entire world that abstract, intangible forces like fate or destiny are inconsequential to him. And so when that change finally comes, it won't just alter the balance of power, it's going to be something the world hasn't seen in over 800 years. And I think that's the biggest clue that Oda has always planned for Dragon to be a top tier force. Dragon isn't just a fighter, he is the embodiment of one of One Piece's most central themes. He literally started a group called the Freedom Fighters before the Revolutionary Army even existed. And so Luffy might represent personal freedoms, going island to island, changing individual lives, but Dragon has a larger vision. He sees the larger picture. He stands for dismantling the entire system of oppression in one stroke. That's the kind of ambition you give to someone who can actually pull it off. Not to mention that Oda didn't come up with Dragon's image out of nowhere. In his office, Oda keeps a photo of Che Guevara, the real-life revolutionary who almost certainly inspired Dragon. Guevara led multiple uprisings, including the Cuban Revolution, and Dragon's favorite food was revealed in an SBS to just happen to be bocaditos, a Cuban slider sandwich. And the parallels go deeper. Early in its history, the Revolutionary Army acted as mercenaries for nations already trying to topple monarchies, a direct mirror of Guevara's involvement in training fighters and spreading guerrilla warfare tactics across Latin America and Africa. Dragon's ship is even called the Wind Gramma, named after the Gramma boat used by Guevara and the July 26th movement to sail from Mexico to Cuba. In chapter 1097, we learned that Dragon was once a Marine, but found no justice there. And that's almost exactly Guevara's own awakening during his motorcycle journey across South America, where he saw poverty, hunger, and disease firsthand and realized that the system itself was the problem. And just like Guevara saw the injustices of colonialism, Dragon sees the tyranny of the world government. And when an author like Oda bases a major character on a real-world revolutionary that he admires in a series where his entire story is about freedom, that's a sign that he's building that character to be an unstoppable figure in the story's endgame. Dragon isn't just the main character's dad, he's the man with the will, the ideology, and the power to change the world. And if you're betting on who's going to shake the foundations of One Piece the most, you should be buying Dragon stocks yesterday. When you combine that ideological weight with sheer combat potential, it's hard to see anyone in the series matching him. At the very least, Dragon has to be on par with the Yonko, not just because of his personal reputation, but because the Revolutionary Army is the only independent force that actively challenges the balance between the three great powers: the four emperors, the Marines, and what used to be the seven warlords of the sea. To be taken seriously as the leader of that kind of faction, you have to be capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with the strongest names alive. And the ceiling for his strength could go far higher. If fighters like Shanks and Sakazuki already set the bar for top tier combat ability for pirates and Marines alike, there's no reason Dragon can't be operating at or above that level. In fact, given how Oda has kept him in reserve for over 2 decades, it's entirely possible that he's closer to what we think of as Pirate King level. Not just in raw power, but but in his capacity to influence the outcome of a global war. And that's actually what got me started thinking about Dragon lately. In the new Egghead Island anime opening, there's a sequence showing the major factions of the world. Shanks and the new Yonko get their shot. Garling and the soon-to-be revealed God's Knights get theirs. Kobe stands with the Marines and sword, and Sabo naturally appears with the Revolutionary Army. But when Dragon appears, his backdrop isn't the Revolutionary Army that was already used for Sabo. Instead, we see Logetown, specifically the execution platform where Roger died. And that's a bizarre choice unless the anime team knows something that we don't know yet. It's as if they're hinting that Dragon's story and the Pirate King are more connected than we realize. And I mean, yes, one simple explanation could be that that's simply where Dragon was first introduced, but for a man who is so already thematically tied to freedom, rebellion, and the dismantling of the world order, placing him against that backdrop is loaded imagery. It subtly positions him as not just a background leader, but as someone central to that same world-shaking legacy that Roger and Luffy embody. And if the anime is willing to plant that kind of visual clue, it could mean Oda's saving Dragon for one of the most important, most powerful reveals in the entire endgame. And the other thing that has me thinking Oda has big plans for Dragon is the inevitable clash that seems to be brewing between him and Figureland Garling. Dragon was the very first person in the series to ever mention the Holy Knights, and we know that Garling was previously their supreme commander. That's not a throwaway detail. It's the head of the Revolutionary Army, acknowledging the existence of the world government's most elite, most mysterious unit. From a storytelling perspective, they are perfect foils. Dragon represents the ultimate rebellion, leading a global movement to topple the world government, whereas Garling represents the most entrenched arm of that same world order, someone who enforces it with absolute authority. It's not hard to picture them as two generals destined to meet on the battlefield. And here's what makes that even better from a narrative standpoint. Figureland Garling wasn't just the leader of the Holy Knights, he's also Shanks' father, which means that if Dragon and Garling do eventually clash, it won't just be the supreme commanders, or at least the former supreme commander of their respective factions. It will be Luffy's father against Shanks' father. And that's wild because Shanks and Luffy's relationship is one of the emotional cornerstones of the entire series. Luffy's dream started because of Shanks. Shanks risked everything to protect Luffy when he was just a kid. And now, decades later, their fathers might be poised to meet on opposite sides of the largest war in history. Because this isn't just about winning a duel. Dragon's strength will almost certainly be the kind that shifts the course of the entire series. And if Oda has waited this long before we can see him in action, it's because his reveal is meant to be more than just a flashy entrance. It's meant to redraw the power scale and show us that some players in this world operate on an entirely different level. So when Dragon finally makes his move, it won't just be the actions of Luffy's father. It will be the arrival of a man who can tilt the balance of the world simply by showing up. Someone who has the means, the will, and the conviction to see his revolution through to the very end, realizing freedom for the entire world, achieving the very same goal as his son Luffy. But let me know what you think about Dragon and his role in the final saga by leaving a comment below. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please like and share the video. Please also subscribe to help the JoyFleet get to 100,000 subscribers. We'd love to have you on board. You can also help support the channel further by becoming a Patreon or channel member like these wonderful people. But as always, thank you so much for listening to another one of my ramblings. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.